So, what lessons can diplomats and policymakers today learn from the process of normalization?
Well, I think there's some obvious lessons. One is that you can seldom go wrong by recognizing reality and accommodating yourself to it, even if it is not what you would like. And that is what the United States finally did with China after 2.5 decades of trying everything else. We are, in fact, famous for eventually doing the right thing after exhausting all the alternatives. So that is the first lesson. The second one is that it's important to sustain communication, whether with an enemy or with a friend. If you don't sustain communication, you risk strategic surprise. But a corollary to this is that it's not always better to talk than not to talk. Sometimes not talking is a form of negotiation. And you shouldn't talk unless you know what you're going to say and what it might result in. And the third lesson, perhaps, if I'm up to three, is that when you put events in motion, you can't tell where they're going to end. Nobody imagined in 1971-72, when we were deeply concerned about Chinese weakness, vulnerability, and isolation, that 50 years later, we would be concerned about the opposite.
Right.
China's strength, connectedness, and wealth and power. China has become, much to everyone's surprise, a very competitive part of the capitalist world. Some people have joked and said that it was necessary for the United States to save China from the Soviet Union and for China to save capitalism from itself. In any event, you can't tell how events will proceed. In that connection, there's one thing that I find very interesting. I met Deng Xiaoping in 1974 when he came to the United Nations. He'd temporarily been released from a detention, only to be detained again later on. But he was obviously a remarkable man. He had worked as a very young man in France. He was actually one of the founders of the Communist Party there, and was very familiar with France after World War I and early 20s, as well as with the predictions of classical Marxism and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union about how France would develop. In 1974, after visiting New York, he went back to France, to Paris, and he could see that the predictions that Marxist ideology had made were complete nonsense. Something very different had happened. And he began to think about that. And I think this had a great deal to do with his decision to de-Sovietize and to some extent de-Maoify China and to join the rest of the world. And he set in motion trends that transformed global politics, transformed the global economy, raised 800 million people from poverty, and made China, once again, a powerful force for leadership on the planet. Not bad for government work.